In a quiet little neighborhood, where the streets were lined with trees and houses looked almost identical, there lived an ordinary man. His life was simple, nothing too exciting, but also nothing to complain about. He worked as an accountant, spent his evenings watching TV, and occasionally helped out in the community garden. People knew him as someone who kept to himself, polite yet reserved. On weekends, he liked fixing things around the house. It gave him a sense of accomplishment, even if it was just tightening a loose doorknob or painting a patch of peeling wall. One Saturday morning, rain poured steadily outside, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. The weather wasn't great for gardening or going out, so the man decided it was finally time to tackle something he'd been avoiding for years: cleaning out the attic. It wasn't that he disliked the idea. It was more because the attic had always felt off. Maybe it was the way the floorboards groaned underfoot, or how the air smelled musty no matter what. Whatever it was, he'd put off dealing with it for as long as possible. But today, with nothing else to do, he figured it was now or never. He climbed up the rickety wooden ladder leading to the attic, holding a flashlight in one hand. The beam of light cut through the thick layer of dust hanging in the air. Boxes stacked haphazardly greeted him, along with old furniture draped in faded sheets. The place hadn't been touched in decades, judging by the amount of grime covering everything. As he stepped inside, the floor creaked loudly beneath his weight, making him wince. He began sorting through the clutter, tossing aside items that held no value. A broken lamp, some outdated magazines, and a few pieces of childhood memorabilia that brought back faint memories. But then, something caught his eye. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes and an old wardrobe, the wall looked different from the rest. While the other walls were rough and worn, this section appeared smooth and newer, almost as if it didn't belong there at all. Curious, he moved closer, brushing away cobwebs and layers of dust. What he found made his heart skip a beat. Embedded into the wall was a small door, barely 3 feet tall. It was sealed shut, without any visible handle or hinges, and its surface was cold to the touch. The man stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. How could such a thing exist in his house? He'd lived there for over 5 years and never noticed it before. Was it part of the original structure? Or had someone added it later? The questions swirled in his mind, each one fueling his curiosity further. Despite the eerie feeling creeping up his spine, he couldn't resist the urge to find out more. After all, it was just a door. What harm could it possibly do? With newfound determination, he went back downstairs to grab tools from his garage. A hammer, a crowbar, and a screwdriver set were soon clutched in his hands as he returned to the attic. Setting them down beside the mysterious door, he took a deep breath and got to work. At first, nothing happened. The metal seemed impossibly strong, refusing to budge no matter how hard he tried. Sweat dripped down his forehead as frustration mounted, but he refused to give up. This door had piqued his interest too much to walk away now. Hours passed and his muscles ached from the effort. Just when he thought he might have to abandon the attempt altogether, he heard a faint click. Something shifted. With renewed energy, he pushed harder and slowly. Agonizingly, the door began to swing open. A rush of cold air hit him, sending goosebumps racing down his arms. Beyond the threshold lay darkness, a yawning void that seemed to swallow the light from his flashlight. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether stepping inside was a good idea. But the pull of mystery was irresistible. Taking a shaky breath, he grabbed the flashlight and stepped forward, ready to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden within. The narrow staircase spiraled downward into the earth, each step creaking under his weight. The air grew colder and damper the deeper he descended, and the faint beam of his flashlight barely cut through the thick darkness. His heart pounded. In his chest, a mix of fear and excitement driving him forward. He couldn't explain why he felt so drawn to this hidden space. It was as if some unseen force was pulling him closer, urging him to uncover its secrets. Still, every instinct screamed at him to turn back. But he pressed on, one hesitant step after another. At the bottom of the stairs, the man found himself in a small chamber. The walls were made of rough stone, uneven and jagged, as though they had been carved by hand centuries ago. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the surface, their shapes unfamiliar and unsettling. They pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. In the center stood an altar-like structure, covered in layers of dust. On top of it lay an ancient book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The sight sent a shiver down his spine. Something about this place didn't feel right, like he had stumbled into a world he wasn't meant to see. He hesitated for a moment, torn between curiosity and caution. The logical part of his mind told him to leave immediately, to shut the door behind him and pretend none of this existed. But the pull was too strong. Against his better judgment, he approached the altar and picked up the book. It was heavier than it looked, and the moment his fingers touched it, a strange sensation coursed through his body, a mix of dread and awe that left him breathless. Slowly, he opened the cover, revealing cryptic writings and disturbing illustrations. Some pages showed shadowy figures performing rituals around glowing fires, while others depicted monstrous creatures emerging from swirling voids. The images were grotesque yet impossible to look away from. As he flipped through the pages, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted. The temperature dropped suddenly, sending a chill through the air. The glowing symbols on the walls began to shine brighter, their light flickering erratically. A low hum filled the room, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. Panic bubbled up inside him, but when he tried to close the book, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the object had a will of its own, refusing to let him escape. His hands trembled as he struggled to pry it shut, but it remained stubbornly open, the pages rustling as though stirred by an invisible wind. Then, without warning, the ground beneath him trembled violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the hum escalated into a deafening roar. The man stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Shadows moved across the walls, not just ordinary shadows, but twisted, writhing forms that seemed alive. They coalesced into humanoid shapes, their eyes glowing red with malice. One of them lunged toward him, forcing him to retreat further into the chamber. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but the stairs were blocked by the advancing figures. Trapped, he realized with mounting horror that whatever he had awakened wasn't going to let him leave so easily. Summoning every ounce of courage, he scanned the room frantically for anything that might help him escape. That's when he noticed a lever protruding from the wall near the altar. It was old and rusted, almost blending into the stonework. Without thinking, he dashed toward it, dodging the encroaching shadows. His fingers closed around the lever, and with all his strength he pulled it. Instantly, the chamber was flooded with blinding light. The shadows screamed in agony, dissolving into nothingness as the symbols on the walls dimmed and went dark. The book slammed shut with a loud thud, and the oppressive energy in the room vanished. Gasping for breath, the man bolted for the stairs, not daring to look back. He scrambled up the steps as fast as his legs would carry him, slamming the door, shut behind him once he reached the attic. Trembling from head to toe, he dragged boxes and furniture in front of the entrance, barricading it as best he could. Only then did he allow himself to collapse onto the dusty floor, clutching his chest as he tried to steady his breathing. What had he just unleashed? And more importantly, what would happen next? For hours, he sat there in silence, staring at the sealed door. The initial adrenaline rush faded, leaving behind a gnawing sense of unease. He knew he should call someone, anyone, to tell them what had happened. But who would believe him? Who would understand the gravity of what he'd uncovered? As night fell, the house grew quiet, the only sound being the rhythmic ticking of the clock downstairs. Yet, despite the stillness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards made him jump. Every shadow seemed darker than it should be. Whatever he had disturbed in that underground chamber wasn't done with him yet, and deep down he feared it never would be. The man sat in the attic for what felt like an eternity, his body stiff and his mind racing. The silence of the house pressed down on him, broken only by the occasional groan of settling wood or the distant hum of a car passing outside. But none of those sounds brought him comfort. Instead, they only heightened his awareness of how isolated he was, how completely alone he would be if something were to happen. He glanced at the barricaded door again, half expecting it to burst, open at any moment. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise louder, as though the very fabric of his home had shifted into something unfamiliar and hostile. Finally, exhaustion overtook fear, and he forced himself to stand. His legs wobbled beneath him, still weak from the adrenaline rush earlier. He knew he couldn't stay up here forever. The rest of the house awaited him, along with the illusion of normalcy it provided. Grabbing the flashlight, he descended the rickety ladder back into the main part of the house. The warmth of the living room felt alien after the cold dampness of the hidden chamber, but it did little to ease his nerves. He locked all the doors and windows, checked them twice, then triple-checked just to be sure. For the first time in years, he even slid a chair under the doorknob of his bedroom before finally collapsing onto the bed. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was fitful and plagued with nightmares. Visions of glowing red eyes, writhing shadows, and that ancient book haunted him. He woke several times during the night, drenched in sweat, convinced he heard whispers coming from the walls. Each time he told himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Yet deep down he knew better. Something had followed him out of that chamber, something unseen but undeniably present. By morning he looked haggard, his face pale and his eyes bloodshot. Coffee usually helped clear his mind, but not today. Even the smell of it made him nauseous. Determined to regain some semblance of control, he decided to tackle the problem logically. First, he needed answers. What exactly had he uncovered? Was it some kind of historical artifact, a remnant of an old ritual site, or something far more sinister? He turned to the internet, typing keywords into search engines. Hidden rooms, ancient symbols, sealed doors. Hours passed as he scrolled through articles, forums, and obscure websites, but nothing matched what he'd seen. The symbols carved into the walls were unlike anything documented online, and the descriptions of the creatures in the book didn't align with known mythologies either. Frustration bubbled inside him. How could something so bizarre exist without leaving a trace anywhere? Desperate for help, he reached out to experts. He emailed historians, archaeologists, and even paranormal investigators, attaching photos he'd taken of the symbols in the book before he'd sealed the door shut. Most responses were dismissive, brushing off his story as fiction or exaggeration. One historian suggested it might be a hoax designed to scare people, while another accused him of fabricating evidence for attention. Only one reply gave him pause, a brief message from someone claiming to specialize in occult studies. They warned him not to meddle further, saying cryptically, "Some things are buried for a reason." It wasn't much, but it was enough to send another wave of dread coursing through him. With no real answers and nowhere else to turn, he tried to distract himself by resuming his daily routine. He went to work, cleaned the house, and even attempted watching TV. But nothing worked. The weight of what he'd discovered loomed over everything he did, making even mundane tasks feel unbearable. At night, the house grew eerily quiet, amplifying every tiny sound. Footsteps creaked above him when he knew he was the only one home. Whispers floated through empty hallways, too faint to understand but loud enough to make his skin crawl. Objects moved inexplicably. A mug left on the counter would later appear on the table. A book placed neatly on a shelf would end up lying open on the floor. None of it added up, and each incident chipped away at his sanity. One evening, unable to take it anymore, he decided to confront the situation head-on. Armed with courage fueled by desperation, he returned to the attic. The barricade he'd built around the door remained intact, untouched. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. He hadn't imagined it opening on its own, right? But as he leaned closer to inspect the door, he noticed something that froze him in place. Scratches marred the surface, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. They looked fresh, almost as if something had been clawing at it from the other side. His breath hitched and he stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the boxes stacked behind him. That's when he saw it, a note tucked partially under the edge of a wooden crate nearby. Trembling, he picked it up. Written in shaky handwriting were two words that sent ice coursing through his veins. "I'm waiting." The man stared at the note, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold it steady. The words, "I'm waiting," were scribbled in jagged handwriting, as though whoever, or whatever, had written them had been in a hurry. His mind raced with questions. Who had left it? How had they gotten into his attic without him noticing? And most importantly, what did it mean? Every instinct told him to get out of the house immediately, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. Fear paralyzed him, yet curiosity kept him tethered, unwilling to abandon the mystery just yet. He turned the note over, hoping for more clues, but the other side was blank. Still gripping it tightly, he scanned the attic again, searching for anything unusual. The boxes and furniture looked untouched, exactly as he'd left them when he barricaded the door days earlier. Yet something about the room felt different, wrong even. The air seemed heavier, harder to breathe, and the faint scent of damp earth lingered, though there was no logical reason for it. It was as if the atmosphere itself had shifted, growing darker despite the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the small window. Unable to shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, he backed away slowly, his eyes darting toward every shadowy corner. He reached the ladder and descended quickly, his movements clumsy in his haste. Once back on the ground floor, he slammed the attic hatch shut and dragged a heavy chest across it, reinforcing the barrier between himself and whatever might be lurking above. Then, leaning against the wall, he tried to calm his racing heart. But the note kept replaying in his mind like a broken record. "I'm waiting." Waiting for what? For him to return? To open the door again? Or simply for the right moment to strike? Over the next few days, paranoia consumed him. He couldn't focus on work or eat properly, and sleep became nearly impossible. Every sound made him jump. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves, outside, even the buzz of the refrigerator. He started carrying a baseball bat around the house, clutching it like a lifeline whenever he ventured into another room. At night, he slept with the lights on, convinced that darkness would invite the unknown closer. Even then, he woke repeatedly, certain he'd heard footsteps pacing near his bed or whispers drifting through the walls. One morning, while making coffee, he noticed something else strange. A book from his living room shelf, a plain, unremarkable novel he'd read years ago, was now sitting on the dining table, opened to a random page. Confused, he picked it up and flipped through it, only to find a single sentence underlined in red ink. "They always come back." His stomach churned. He didn't own a red pen, nor had he ever marked anything in that book. Someone, or something, was leaving messages for him, deliberately taunting him. Determined to regain control, he decided to fight back. If this presence wanted to play games, he would make sure it regretted choosing him. First, he installed cameras throughout the house, positioning them strategically to cover every angle. He set up motion sensors in the attic and basement, ensuring he'd know if anything moved where it shouldn't. Then he stocked up on supplies, flashlights, batteries, salt, after reading somewhere that it could ward off negative energies, and even a whistle to alert neighbors if things got desperate. Preparing for the worst gave him a small sense of empowerment, though deep down he knew none of these measures might actually stop whatever was haunting him. That night, he sat in the living room, staring at the live feed from the cameras displayed on his laptop screen. Everything appeared normal, at least as normal as things could be given the circumstances. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he forced himself to stay awake, watching intently for any sign of movement. Hours passed uneventfully, and just as he began to think maybe tonight would be quiet, one of the attic cameras caught something. A shadow flickered across the frame, too fast for him to identify. His pulse quickened, and he rewound the footage, playing it back frame by frame. There it was again, a dark shape sliding along the wall, almost blending into the background. Before panic could fully take hold, he grabbed the baseball bat and headed upstairs. His steps were cautious, deliberate, each one echoing loudly in the silence. When he reached the attic hatch, he hesitated, listening for any noise beyond it. Nothing. Summoning his courage, he pushed the chest aside and pulled the hatch open. The beam of his flashlight revealed nothing out of place, at least not at first glance. But as he climbed up and swept the light across the room, he froze. The scratches on the sealed door had multiplied, crisscrossing wildly as if clawed by multiple sets of hands or claws. And in the center of the chaos, scrawled in what looked disturbingly like dried mud, were two new words. Come closer. This time, fear overwhelmed him completely. He stumbled backward, nearly falling down the ladder in his haste to escape. Back in the safety of his living room, he collapsed onto the couch, his mind spinning. Whatever was behind that door wasn't just waiting, it was testing him, daring him to confront it. And the worst part? Despite every rational thought screaming at him to leave it alone, a part of him couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he did. The man sat on the couch, his hands gripping the edge of a cushion so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, and an unsettling curiosity that refused to be ignored. The message on the decker had been clear. Come closer. It wasn't just taunting him, it was inviting him. But why? What could possibly lie beyond that sealed entrance that demanded his attention so insistently? He tried to push the thought away, reminding himself of the horrors he'd already witnessed. The glowing symbols, the writhing shadows, the guttural voice that echoed through the chamber. Yet no matter how hard he resisted, the pull remained, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. That night, sleep eluded him entirely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of those red eyes staring back at him, heard the low hum that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. He tossed and turned, his body exhausted but his mind wide awake. By morning, he felt like a ghost haunting his own home, moving through the rooms mechanically while his thoughts spiraled out of control. Desperation began to creep in. He couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound, dreading what each new day might bring. Something had to give. He decided to take drastic action. If this presence wanted him to come closer, maybe he needed to face it head-on, not recklessly, but with preparation. Gathering supplies, he filled a backpack with essentials, flashlights, extra batteries, a notebook to document anything unusual, and even a small camcorder to record everything. He also included items people online claimed could offer protection, a bag of salt, a lighter, and a few religious symbols borrowed from a neighbor who attended church regularly. Whether they would actually work, he didn't know, but having something tangible to cling to gave him a sliver of hope. The hardest part was convincing himself to return to the attic. Standing at the bottom of the ladder, he hesitated for what felt like an eternity. His heart pounded in his chest and his palms were slick with sweat. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself why he was doing this, to end the torment once and for all. Slowly, step by step, he climbed up, the creak of the wood beneath him sounding impossibly loud in the silence. When he reached the top, he paused, shining his flashlight around the room. Nothing seemed out of place except for the door. The scratches now covered nearly every inch of its surface, as if clawed repeatedly in frustration or hunger. At the center, the words, "Come closer," glared at him like a challenge. Summoning every ounce of courage, he approached the door. His hands trembled as he set down the backpack and pulled out the camcorder, turning it on and positioning it to capture everything. If something happens, he muttered to himself, at least someone will know. With that grim thought, he reached for the lever he'd used before, the one that had flooded the chamber with light and banished the shadows. As his fingers brushed against it, a cold breeze swept through the attic, though no windows were open. Goosebumps raced across his skin, but he didn't stop. Gritting his teeth, he pulled the lever again. Instantly, the room changed. The symbols on the walls flared to life, brighter than ever, casting pulsating light that made the shadows dance wildly. The air grew icy, stealing his breath, and the same deafening hum filled the space, vibrating through his skull. This time, however, there was something new, a faint whispering, too soft to understand but unmistakably present. It sounded like voices overlapping, speaking in languages he couldn't comprehend. His grip on the flashlight tightened as he forced himself to focus. Whatever happened next, he needed to stay calm. As the hum intensified, the door shuddered violently, rattling in its frame. For a moment, he thought it might burst open on its own, but instead it slowly swung inward, revealing the dark staircase leading downward. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through him, but he swallowed it down, clutching the flashlight and the backpack. He stepped forward, descending cautiously into the abyss below. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if gravity itself was trying to hold him back. The oppressive atmosphere pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe, yet he pushed onward, driven by a mix of fear and determination. At the bottom, the chamber looked different. The altar stood where it had before, but the ancient book was gone, leaving behind only a faint imprint in the dust. In its place lay a single object, a key, tarnished and rusted, resting atop the stone surface. The glowing symbols on the walls pulsed erratically, their light flickering like dying embers. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, swirling around him in a chaotic symphony of voices. He froze, unsure whether to touch the key or leave it untouched. Before he could decide, the ground beneath him trembled, sending a shockwave rippling through the chamber. Suddenly the shadows returned, darker and denser than before. They swirled together, forming shapes that loomed menacingly over him. One figure emerged from the chaos, taller and more defined than the others, its glowing red eyes locking onto his. Its form shifted constantly, neither fully human nor beast, but undeniably alive. It raised an arm, or what passed for one, and pointed directly at him, its gaze piercing through his soul. Then in a voice that resonated like thunder, it spoke two chilling words. "You're mine." Panic surged through him, and he stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The shadows closed in, their movements swift and predatory. Trapped between them and the staircase, he realized he had only seconds to act. Grabbing the key from the altar, he turned and bolted toward the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind him, the shadows screamed in fury, their cries echoing through the chamber as he reached the attic and slammed the door shut. Breathing heavily, he barricaded it once more, collapsing onto the floor as the adrenaline drained from his system. Clutching the key in his hand, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever game he was playing, it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The man sat on the attic floor, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The key in his hand felt heavier than it should, its rusted surface rough against his palm. Every instinct told him to throw it away, to bury it somewhere far from the house, or better yet, destroy it. But something stopped him. Deep down, he knew this key wasn't just another random object, it was a piece of the puzzle, a thread connecting him to whatever force had invaded his life. Ignoring it wouldn't make things better. It might even make them worse. He stared at the sealed door again, now silent and still after the chaos that had erupted moments earlier. For once, it didn't seem like an active threat, but that didn't ease his unease. If anything, the quiet felt more menacing, like the calm before a storm. His mind raced with possibilities. What did the key unlock? Was it meant to open something inside the hidden chamber, or was it tied to another mystery waiting to be uncovered? And most importantly, should he use it at all? The thought of inserting it into any lock, whether in the attic or elsewhere, filled him with dread. Yet, the alternative, doing nothing and letting the presence continue to haunt him, felt equally unbearable. For hours, he debated what to do. He paced back and forth across the attic, occasionally glancing at the cameras he'd set up, ensuring they were still recording. Occasionally, he'd replay the footage from earlier, watching himself descend into the chamber and emerge moments later, visibly shaken. Seeing it on screen somehow made the experience feel less surreal, grounding him in the reality of what he was facing. But no matter how many times he rewound and paused the video, one thing remained clear. The shadowy figure's final words echoed in his mind like a curse. "You're mine." Those two words haunted him, gnawing at his resolve and fueling his fear. By late afternoon, exhaustion began to take its toll. Sleep deprivation and constant stress had left him physically drained, but his mind refused to rest. He decided to step outside for some fresh air, hoping it would help clear his thoughts. As he walked through the neighborhood, he noticed people going about their lives as if nothing unusual was happening. Kids played on swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and cars passed by without a second glance. The normalcy of it all struck him deeply. How could the world seem so peaceful when his own life had been turned upside down? It was as though he existed in a completely different reality, one where danger lurked behind every corner and shadows whispered threats in the dark. When he returned home, he found himself staring at the key again. This time, he placed it under a bright lamp, examining it closely. There were faint markings etched into its surface, barely visible beneath layers of grime. Using a cloth and some cleaning solution, he carefully wiped it clean, revealing intricate patterns resembling the symbols he'd seen in the hidden chamber. A chill ran down his spine. Whatever this key unlocked, it was connected to the same mysterious force that had awakened in his house. That realization only deepened his dilemma. Should he try to understand it further, or cut ties entirely? Desperate for guidance, he reached out to someone he hadn't considered before, a local priest known for being approachable and open-minded. He didn't consider himself religious, but he figured the man might have insight into dealing with supernatural phenomena, or at least know someone who did. After explaining his situation, leaving out some of the more unsettling details, the priest listened intently, nodding occasionally. When he finished, the priest leaned forward, his expression serious. "Some doors are meant to stay closed," he said quietly. "But if you've already opened one, well, sometimes we must confront what lies beyond to find peace." The advice didn't offer much comfort, but it gave him a sense of direction. Returning home, he resolved to take action, not recklessly, but methodically. First, he gathered everything he'd collected so far, the photos of the symbols, the messages left around the house, and the video footage, and organized them neatly. Then, he sketched a rough map of the attic and the hidden chamber, marking areas of interest. Finally, he placed the key in a small wooden box, locking it away temporarily. If he was going to use it, he needed to prepare thoroughly first. Over the next few days, he focused on fortifying his defenses. He reinforced the barricade around the attic door, adding locks and alarms to ensure nothing could get through without him knowing. He also sprinkled salt along the baseboards and thresholds, following advice he'd read online about warding off negative energies. Though skeptical, he figured it couldn't hurt. At night, he kept the camcorders running and monitored the feeds, obsessively, searching for any sign of movement. For a while, the house remained eerily quiet, almost too quiet. No whispers drifted through the walls, no objects moved inexplicably, and the cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary. But the silence didn't bring relief, it brought anticipation. Each passing day felt like a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. The longer the calm stretched on, the more certain he became that it wouldn't last forever. Something was biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when it did, he knew he'd need to be ready. One evening, as he reviewed the footage from the previous night, he noticed something strange. In the brief seconds before dawn, a shadow flickered across the attic camera feed. Just once, quick enough to miss if he blinked. He rewound the clip, playing it frame by frame. The shape was unmistakable, tall, angular, and distinctly humanoid. It stood near the sealed door, motionless, as if watching him. His blood ran cold. Whatever was haunting him wasn't gone. It was still here, lurking just out of sight, waiting for its chance. The man stared at the frozen frame on his laptop screen, his heart pounding like a drum. The shadow in the footage was unmistakable, tall, angular, and unnervingly still. It wasn't just a trick of the light or a stray object caught on camera. It had been standing there deliberately, watching him, watching the door. His hands trembled as he zoomed in, trying to make out more details, but the image remained grainy and indistinct. Still, the shape sent chills racing down his spine. He felt exposed, as if even now those glowing red eyes were boring into him through the screen. He closed the laptop abruptly, unable to look at it anymore. The house suddenly seemed smaller, its walls closing in around him. Every creak and groan echoed louder than usual, each sound amplifying his paranoia. He grabbed the baseball bat he'd kept nearby and began pacing from room to room, checking every corner, peering under furniture, and scanning for anything out of place. But no matter how many times he reassured himself that nothing was there, the feeling of being watched lingered. It was suffocating, an invisible weight pressing down on him wherever he went. That night, sleep was impossible. He sat in the living room with all the lights on, clutching the wooden box containing the key. Part of him wanted to throw it into the fireplace, melt it down until it was nothing but ash. Another part, a stubborn, reckless part, wanted answers. What did the key unlock? Why had it been left for him to find? And why did he feel like using it might be the only way to end this nightmare? The questions swirled endlessly in his mind, keeping him wide awake despite his exhaustion. Around midnight, something changed. The air grew heavy, almost unbearable, as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. A low hum filled the space, faint at first but growing steadily louder. His skin prickled with goosebumps and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Slowly, he turned toward the source of the noise, the attic hatch. The barricade he'd built rattled violently, as if something, or someone, was trying to break through. Panic surged through him, but instead of running, he grabbed the flashlight and camcorder, determined not to face this blindly again. As he approached the hatch, the rattling stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence. For a moment everything was still, then without warning the hatch burst open, sending the chest he'd used as a barrier crashing to the floor. Shadows poured out like smoke, swirling chaotically before coalescing into familiar shapes. Red eyes glowed in the darkness as the figures advanced, their forms shifting between human-like silhouettes and monstrous distortions. One of them stepped forward, taller and more defined than the others, its presence radiating menace. "You shouldn't have come back," it growled, its voice deep and guttural, reverberating through the room. The man froze, his body rigid with fear. The flashlight in his hand shook uncontrollably, casting wild beams of light across the walls. "What do you want?" he managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure tilted its head, studying him like a predator sizing up its prey. "You opened the door," it said slowly, each word dripping with malice. "You brought us here. Now you'll finish what you started." "I didn't ask for any of this," he shouted, surprising even himself with the anger in his tone. "I don't know what you are or why you're here, but I'm not doing anything else for you." The creature let out a low, menacing laugh that sent shivers down his spine. "It's too late for denial," it hissed. "The key chose you. The symbols called to you. You've already taken steps you can't undo. All that's left is to complete the ritual." "Ritual?" he repeated, his voice trembling. "What ritual?" Instead of answering, the figure gestured toward the wooden box clutched tightly in his other hand. "Use it," it commanded. "Unlock the final seal. Let us through." "No," he snapped, backing away instinctively. "I'm not helping you destroy my life or anyone else's." The creature's expression darkened, its glowing eyes narrowing into slits. "You misunderstand," it said coldly. "This isn't about destruction. It's about balance. Your world and ours have been separated for too long. The door must open, you will ensure it." "Balance?" The words made no sense, but the conviction in the creature's voice sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through him. Whatever this balance entailed, he knew it wouldn't bode well for humanity. Summoning every ounce of courage, he tightened his grip on the flashlight and raised it like a weapon. "If you think I'm going to help you, you're wrong. Stay away from me and stay out of my house." For a split second, the creature hesitated, its form flickering like static on a TV screen. Then with a snarl, it lunged forward, its claw-like hands reaching for him. Reacting purely on instinct, he swung the flashlight with all his strength, striking it squarely in the center of its chest. The impact sent it stumbling backward, giving him just enough time to bolt toward the front door. He fumbled with the lock, his fingers slipping over the keys in his haste. Behind him, the shadows screamed in rage, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of fury. Finally, the door clicked open and he stumbled outside, slamming it shut behind him. Gasping for breath, he leaned against the wall, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. The cool night air offered little comfort. He knew the creatures could follow him at any moment. But they didn't. Instead, a single whisper drifted through the door, barely audible yet chillingly clear. "This isn't over." The man stood outside in the cold night air, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The street was quiet, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights, but he felt anything but safe. His house loomed behind him, its windows dark and lifeless, yet somehow menacing. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But his feet refused to move. This was his home, the only place he had known peace before all of this began. Leaving felt like surrendering, like letting whatever force had invaded his life win. But staying meant facing something he couldn't fully comprehend or fight. He glanced down at the wooden box still clutched tightly in his hand. Inside it lay the key, the cursed object that seemed to be at the center of everything. It was small, unassuming, yet it carried a weight far beyond its size. He thought about throwing it into the sewer or burying it deep in the woods where no one could find it. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't solve anything. If the creatures, or whatever they were, wanted it badly enough, they'd find a way to retrieve it. And if they couldn't, they'd come for him instead. There was no escaping what he'd unleashed. For hours he sat on the curb, staring blankly at the pavement as cars passed by occasionally. To the drivers, he probably looked like just another tired neighbor taking a late-night breather. They had no idea how close they were to something so unnatural, so dangerous. The thought made him sick. What if the ritual the creature mentioned succeeded? What if these beings broke through completely and spilled into the world unchecked? Could anyone stop them? Or would they simply consume everything in their path until nothing remained? By dawn, exhaustion finally overtook fear, and he forced himself to stand. His body ached from sitting on the hard ground and his mind felt foggy from lack of sleep. Still, he knew he couldn't stay out here forever. Slowly, cautiously, he approached the front door. The whispers from earlier were gone now, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed almost worse. Taking a deep breath, he turned the knob and stepped inside. The house was exactly as he'd left it, the overturned furniture, the scattered tools, and the gaping hole where the attic hatch had been torn apart. Yet something felt different. The oppressive heaviness in the air was gone, replaced by an unsettling emptiness. No shadows lingered in the corners, no whispers drifted through the walls. For the first time in days, the house felt normal. Too normal. It set off alarm bells in his head, but he pushed forward, determined to confront whatever awaited him upstairs. When he reached the attic, the sealed door stood untouched, its surface scarred with scratches but otherwise unchanged. The lever beside it gleamed dully in the morning light filtering through the window. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the wooden box containing the key. Something told him this moment would define everything, whether he lived or died, whether the world remained safe or spiraled into chaos. With trembling hands, he opened the box and took out the key, holding it up to examine it one last time. Its intricate patterns seemed to shimmer faintly, almost as if alive. Summoning every ounce of courage, he inserted the key into the lock embedded in the door. It fit perfectly, clicking into place with an audible snap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the door began to creak open on its own, revealing a blinding white light beyond. Unlike the dark, foreboding chamber below, this light was warm and inviting, filling the attic with an almost heavenly glow. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying with it a sense of calm he hadn't felt in weeks. From the light emerged a figure, not monstrous or threatening, but serene and radiant. It was humanoid, though its features were indistinct, blurred like smoke caught in sunlight. "You've done well," it said softly, its voice soothing and melodic. "But your trial is not yet complete." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" "I am a guardian," the figure replied. "And you have been chosen to restore balance between worlds. The entities you encountered sought to exploit the rift for their own gain, but you have proven yourself worthy of protecting it." "Protecting it?" he echoed, confusion mixing with disbelief. "How can I protect something I don't even understand?" "You already have," the figure said gently. "By resisting their demands, by refusing to open the final seal, you have delayed their plans. Now you must seal it permanently." "How?" he demanded, his frustration bubbling over. "Tell me what I need to do." The figure extended a hand, palm upward, and a glowing orb materialized above it. "Take this," it instructed. "Place it within the chamber at the heart of the altar. It will close the rift forever." He hesitated, unsure whether to trust the mysterious being. But something about its presence reassured him. Perhaps it was the absence of malice, or maybe it was the overwhelming sense that he had no other choice. Nodding slowly, he accepted the orb and descended into the hidden chamber once more. At the base of the altar, he placed the orb carefully, watching as it pulsed with light. The symbols on the walls dimmed, then faded entirely, and the oppressive energy that had filled the room dissipated like smoke. As the last traces of the rift vanished, the chamber grew silent, peaceful even. When he returned to the attic, both the door and the figure were gone, leaving behind only empty space. Exhausted but relieved, he sank to the floor, tears streaming down his face. Whatever had haunted him was finally gone, for good, or so he hoped.